This particular seminar, you can hit "Got it" on your screen. Welcome everybody. I'm Michelle Piskin, the Vice President of Education and Training at Caring Kind. I welcome you all to our Zoom room. I am very happy to share the room tonight with Attorney David Cronenberg from Grimaldi Young Law Group. And we have tonight, we're actually just kicking off a new seminar, which is navigating changes to the Medicaid home care assessment process. Things got a little bit more complicated, and Rachel Murat was so wonderful, and Judy, to be able to talk to me about an opportunity to be able to offer this seminar. And lo and behold, the actual turnout has been overwhelming. So I appreciate you all being here. A little bit of housekeeping rules before we start. If you can keep yourself on mute, you can answer your question. You can ask your questions in our chat. Attorney Cronenberg will address them at the end of the presentation. If you haven't been to Caring Kind or have visited any of our seminars before, I encourage you to go to caringkindnyc.org and check out our website and some of the programs that we offer. Or you can call our helpline, which is 646-744-2900. I will put that number into chat for you. And that will also connect you to any of our programs and services, of which there is many. But I won't wait any longer. Actually, I want David to be able to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about him. And I know this is jam-packed with information tonight. So welcome everybody again. If you haven't been part of Caring Kind, I welcome you. If you've been part of Caring Kind, I continue to welcome you. So Attorney Cronenberg, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody, and welcome. Yeah, I was telling Michelle tonight, maybe a lot of people are joining because their outdoor plans may have been canceled. You know, it's crazy. The smoke here reminded me of camp a little bit, but I know it's not camp. So I'm glad to be here. I have been looking forward to trying to work through this and explain this to you guys for several weeks now. In fact, I even made a point of attending some of my clients' assessments that we'll talk about tonight in person. We've been dealing with this new assessment process for about a year, so we're still learning every day about the process, and it's not a perfect process. But about myself, I'm an elder law attorney. I'm one of the partners at Grimaldi Young Law Group, which is exclusively an elder law and a firm for folks with disabilities, and we do estate planning and those issues. And I'm very proud to be working with Judy and Pauline and the rest of the group, do some really fantastic work. And I have been doing specifically Medicaid work for about 22 years. And before I was with Grimaldi Young, I was with one of the pioneer law firms, Goldfarb, Abrand, and Salzman, which they raised me as an elder law attorney, and Judy was part of that as well. So really happy to be here. I would say that Medicaid, home care, and helping people through that process and allowing them to stay home is probably the most satisfying thing that I have done in my career as an attorney. It's very it's filled with a lot of pride when you're able to achieve you know, that result for people and allow them to stay home and with the dignity and quality of care. And I still am extremely proud of the work that we do. And before I get into this process, and I usually mention this at my consultations, before I tell you all the things that are going wrong with Medicaid, or that things are worse, or that things are challenging, or that there's all these hoops that we have to jump through and bells that we have to ring, before I tell you about all that stuff and make you worry, I want to make a couple of points. First of all, we're in the state of New York, and the state of New York is probably the most generous state with regards to Medicaid benefits in the country. So very proud to be a New Yorker, and very proud of how our lawmakers have prioritized Medicaid as a form of paying for long-term care, in many ways, and I can get into that. That's a whole nother webinar on that. And I'm not going to speak tonight about anything to do with financial eligibility for Medicaid. That's another whole set of webinars that we can do and our firm can do for you. And if you have a need and want a consultation, that's what we do. We would spend a few hours with you explaining on your situation of how someone can achieve Medicaid eligibility. And we go through all the rules and we can get you through that process. And on that note, I often tell people who are coming in for a consultation on Medicaid that especially home care, that the financial eligibility piece of Medicaid is really like mostly a black and white issue, in the sense that you either are eligible or you're not eligible, and we can tell you how to get there, and we'll know exactly when you are eligible, and that's easy. And a lot of folks will be like coming in thinking that's really the tough stuff. That's the hard stuff we're going to have to do. We're going to have to maneuver things in finances and all of that. But I actually tell them, no, the harder part of Medicaid, and I know that there's a lot of caregivers out there listening right now, and families dealing with long-term care issues. And you know this probably very well, that the hardest part of Medicaid home care is the continuity of the care. Who is providing the home care, right? And who's going to come into your home, your most intimate place, and do these most intimate things to you or your loved one? That's the hardest part, right? And so I often will start, before I even talk about any finances, I'll start with talking about continuity, especially if you have an aide already or there's someone in the home already helping. How do we keep that person? And I'm going to talk about that towards the end of the presentation this evening, about my tips on continuity, because I like I said, I usually start the consultations before we even talk about any money or anything like that. I talk about continuity, because I can get through 2 hours of talking about finances, and then we get to the end and they say, well, I have to keep Marge. Marge is the best home care giver and home care aide that I have, and if I can't do it, I don't want to do any of it. And I say, well, okay, let's talk about Marge and how do we get Marge to stay involved in the home care. So the other major point I want to say before I go into things that sound dreary or sound like they're heading in the wrong direction is that the law governing personal care in New York is very clear and very strong. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. And the fact is that while managed care plans, these insurance companies kind of have their grip on the care and the authorization of care right now, they are still bound by these very strong laws. They have contracts which require them to be no more restrictive than the law provides. And the law is very strong. So we have that as a backdrop to all of this. And I think we can get going because I have a lot of things to cover. And I just want to talk about the agenda that we're going to cover tonight. So let's go to the next slide, Rachel. Rachel's going to be helping me through these slides. All right. So first, we're going to talk about an introduction. What is this? What is the new New York Independent Assessor Program? What are we talking about here? And what is it giving you access to? Community-based long-term services and supports. We'll talk about what those are. Okay. Next, I want to cover what Medicaid managed long-term care is and kind of give a backdrop, because I think it's important for everyone to understand what the structural pressures are behind these decisions that can seem kind of crazy, when with hours that are far too low for someone's needs. How is that okay, and how are these plans authorizing so few hours if that's the case? And I want everyone to appreciate how managed care works, and we'll talk about that we'll learn about the capitated rate. What does that mean? And you'll learn that that's kind of like all of our insurance is paid, and some history involved in how we got to this New York Independent Assessor. It's got, I call it kind of the gateway to home care now in New York. And then we're going to talk about the process, the overview of NIA. And obviously there are a lot of acronyms, as with everything is acronym based. So we're going to talk, NAIA is going to be how I refer to the assessment program for now. Okay, then we're going to talk about the 6 steps involved, 6 steps involved in obtaining just access to enrolling in a Medicaid managed long-term care plan in order to get services. All right, then we're going to talk about some myths, some of my observations, and like I talked about before, some of my strategies for the continuity of care, which again, I feel like is the most important part, because if the person receiving care is not happy, we have big problems. We have big challenges in a successful home care plan, right? And then at the end, I'll give some resources about where to file complaints. We're already talking about complaints, right? And some resources and some special thanks, especially to my friends at the New York Legal Assistance Group. All right, so let's move forward. Let's get going. All right, so the introduction. What is the New York Independent Assessor Program? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so it's a new procedure that started as of May 2022, so we're just over a year. And we're going to talk about what was previous to this as well. And here are some definitions. I got this right off of the NAIA website. I give you I gave you the web link at the bottom of my slide. It takes you to NAIA has their own website where they give information about the program. So let's read this. NAIA is a program for Medicaid members who want to receive community-based long-term services and supports. Okay, makes sense. NAIA assesses Medicaid members to determine if they are eligible to receive these supports. The objective of the assessment is to help the program understand how a person's care needs affect their daily lives. And I found that knowing what I know about the results of the NAIA assessments and how they then translate into the managed care plans offers of ours, I found that statement to be very interesting. And I guess we can reflect back on that later as we go through it. And maybe you can reflect back on that if you go through this experience yourself. Okay, next slide. All right, so what changed just a year ago? Okay, what changed is that the NAIA replaces the conflict-free assessment. I always love that name, and I'm going to explain that name a little later about where that kind of comes from. All right, so it replaces the conflict-free assessment, which was needed for enrolling in a managed long-term care plan. Okay, it's a new assessment process for home care from both mainstream managed care plans or the local Department of Social Services. Okay, and I'm going to mention now, and we'll talk about it in a minute, I'm not going to focus a lot on the mainstream managed care plans and not so much on the immediate need program. There's some nuances to the NAIAs with regards to those programs. I'm going to keep most of my comments centered today on the managed long-term care plan track, which is what most people are going to go through. All right. It changed who does the nursing assessments. It changed who does the physician's orders for home care. NAIA also changed the order of the physician's order and nursing assessment. And it also introduced what's called an independent review, which is now required for any case that is considered or recommended for more than 12 hours of care a day. So anything that we're talking about with regards to live-in services or split shift services, any of those high-hour cases, now there's a further independent review, which we'll also get into. Okay, next slide. What didn't change, okay, and this is very important, I referenced this a little bit ago. The eligibility criteria for home care, or MLTC, which is managed long-term care enrollment, did not change, okay? I'm giving you the site. I don't know how many attorneys are out there, but this is a regulation site that I have known. It's kind of my Bible for personal care. It has been for 20 years, 22 now, 18 NYCRR 50514. Still very strong, okay? And we have that as the backdrop, and those are the laws that, along with other administrative directives and fair hearing decisions and a whole volume of authority, that governs personal care. Still strong, and we still have that going for us as consumers and as recipients for Medicaid home care. The assessment tool did not change. They are still using what's called the UAS New York form, which is about a 30+ page form that has many multitude of questions about someone's care needs, their activities of daily living, and how much they are able to perform them and what kind of assistance they need. The assessment tool is now called the Community Health Assessment, the CHA. We'll refer to that later on as well when we talk about that first assessment, which is called the Community Health Assessment. That's what they're filling out, the UASNY. Okay, and it also didn't change who develops the plan of care. And this is very important too, as we'll talk about in a little while. It's still the managed long-term care plan that develops the plan of care, despite what the NIA result is. Okay, what the state's NIA result is, the managed care plan is still the ultimate sayer in what they authorize. Okay, and I think that that's very important because, as we'll see later on, the managed care plans will love to say now, you know, well, the NIA only allows us to provide X amount of hours. And that's really not true. They are still the ultimate entity that decides how many hours should be in someone's care plan. Okay. All right. Next slide. So what are we talking about? What access are we trying to get to? We're trying to attain one of these types of services: personal care services, consumer-directed personal assistance, certified home health agency, private duty nursing services, even adult day health care, social adult health care, and these home and community-based waiver programs. Those are the types of community-based long-term care services and supports that we're talking about. Mostly today, I'm going to be focusing on the top one, the personal care services, and also enveloped in that is consumer-directed personal care assistance. Okay. All right. Next slide. All right. So what is personal care services? What are we talking about? And some of this you guys may know this stuff by heart, but I figured to give a backdrop and to give a background as we move forward on top of it, I think it's important to just go through it. Assistance with activities of daily living, your ADLs, which are everyday tasks needed to live independently. We go through them: mobility, bathing, dressing, and toileting. I'm going to talk about some of these in more detail, but these are your classic activities of daily living. These are the classic subject matter of these assessments. And, you know, we're going to talk about how I prepare clients for these assessments. These are the top types of ADLs that are going to really score people high. And these are the types of ADLs, whereas I tell my clients, this is not a time to show how much you can do. It really is a time to explain and to be honest about what you need assistance with, right? And so you look at these: mobility, bathing, dressing, and toileting. I'm going to take the top one and the bottom one, and we're really going to focus on those in a little while, because those are what we call unscheduled tasks. And I'll explain that a little further in a little bit. All right. Next slide. All right. So the hours. Well, hours that we're talking about with personal care services, we still have, despite what people may hear, and I hear this all the time as people call me up for a courtesy call, they say, well, there's no way, they don't have 24-hour care anymore, do they? That's not true. They do. We have up to 24-hour continuous split shift care for assistance with ADLs or IDADLs. I'll explain those instrumental activities of daily living: shopping, meal prep, laundry, and cleaning. Skilled care. Okay, that's an important factor in personal care services. Remember, a personal care aide may not assist with skilled care, such as injections and suctioning. But that's where we get a little bit of a difference between a consumer-directed aide who may do those things. Okay, I'm not going to get that deep into that, but there is a difference there between a regular personal care services through like a home care agency, or using a consumer-directed personal care assistance aide, which is where you pick your own aide, you pick your own worker. I have some pros and cons about that program. I think that the consumer-directed puts a little more responsibility on the family who may be looking to alleviate a little responsibility. So an agency is good for that. Also remember, there's issues with who can touch the medication. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too. Eligibility criteria for directing or self-directing. A consumer must be self-directing or have someone to direct care. So it's not that the consumer must be self-directing, period. There also can be someone there to direct care. They call it in the law a self-directing other. So that can be a family, that can be a spouse, that can be a friend, a neighbor, a geriatric care manager. So it's not that the consumer themselves have to be self-directing. And also the consumer must have a stable medical condition, which is not expected to need frequent nursing judgment. This is one of those areas we're going to get dig a little bit more into as well. Okay. The consumer directed only, we talked about this briefly. Consumer or person directing care must recruit and train and schedule the personal assistants, including the backups. The aide may not be the same person, the personal assistant, excuse me, may not be the same person who's directing the care if the consumer is not self-directing. That's because there's employment issues involved. There's someone who's signing off on the time sheets and all of that. So there has to be a separate person who is either the personal assistant rather than the person who's directing the care. Okay. The personal assistant may be the consumer's adult child, parent of a child over the age of 21 or other relative. But this is a crucial one. The personal assistant may not be the spouse or a parent of a minor child. That's because they have a legal responsibility for that person, so they can't get paid to be their aide. Okay. All right, next slide. All right, so here's one of the areas where I'm going to explain how, where I'm not going to put some emphasis, but I wanted to explain a little bit. So where do you access community-based long-term care services and supports? It depends. Does the consumer have Medicare? Okay. Number one group, consumer has Medicaid, but not Medicare, which mostly includes people under 65, but also older immigrants on SSI who are not eligible for Medicare. They must enroll in a mainstream Medicaid managed care plan. Okay. And there are some nuances and some differences with that track as opposed to this number two, which are folks who have Medicaid and Medicare. And I think that's probably the population that considers that is part of Caring Kind or is using Caring Kind services and supports are mostly the folks who have both Medicaid and Medicare. For those folks, they must enroll in a managed long-term care plan unless they're excluded from a managed long-term care plan, which would mean they're in one of these other programs, OPWDD, the Nursing Home Transition and Diversion Program, or the Traumatic Brain Injury Program, or an in-home hospice program. And I'm not going to get that much into hospice right now, but there is a little bit of what we call, I guess you have to do a little bit of a jump through a hoop. If someone's on hospice, we're going to have to disenroll them from hospice to get the home care, and then we can add back the hospice. Call me, I'll explain that to you if you need to, but that's a little bit of a nuance. This person who's already receiving hospice is not eligible to enroll in a managed long-term care plan, but we have a way around that, okay? And then there's also the exempt from MLTC, the immediate need request. But after 120 days, if you obtain your services through an immediate need request, you're still going to be transitioned over to managed long-term care. For most of my clients, I choose not to use immediate need. I have reasons for that. A lot of them have to do with the continuity of care and how we're going to keep the current aids that we have. If we're not going to use consumer directed, there's a lot of nuance to that as well. I'm not going to get into that right now, but basically what I'm telling you is that you all end up in managed long-term care plans regardless. So sometimes I just feel it's most efficient to just go right on that stream, and that's what we're talking about today. All right, next slide. All right, so I've given you a little bit of a background of what NIA is and some of the community services and supports that we want to access. Okay, now let's talk about Medicaid managed long-term care plans. Go back one more. Go back to the yes, yeah. and the capitated rate and some of the history, okay? All right, go ahead. All right, so there's two types of managed long-term care plans. All right, there's what we call the fully capitated plan, which is like a Medicaid Advantage Plus. They call it MAP or PACE plan, which includes all your Medicare and your Medicaid services in one plan, including the MLTC Managed Long-Term Care Plan package, which I'll explain in a minute. That is something that I ask my clients or try to explain to my clients to avoid. We do not want you joining a plan that's going to bundle all of your Medicare services as well. Okay, I ask folks to avoid that. I love my clients to have traditional Medicare where they can go to any doctor that sees that takes Medicare, and their supplemental Medicare plan will cover the copay. I think that gives more access to providers. When you go with one of these fully capitated plans, you have to be in the network of these plans. And I find that that's going to limit services, going to limit what you have access to for your health coverage. Okay, so we're not going to be joining a fully capitated plan. Rather, you're going to be joining a partially capitated plan. And it's interesting, if you go looking at on the Managed Long-Term Care website on plans that operate in New York, you're going to see, you know, the same plan name, and then you're going to see partial, and then you're going to see fully, and you're going to see these names. And if someone didn't explain it to me, I would say, I want the full plan. I want it all. And they will sell you that. You know those commercials on TV when they're all dancing around, be what you want to be. And all these healthy seniors are on there, and they're selling these, and they're pushing these plans onto people. There's a reason. They're really great if you're healthy. They're not so great if you need services. So we want to focus on the partially capitated plan, which is the most popular. It includes only Medicaid services in the MLTC package, and the member keeps preferred Medicare coverage separate from their managed long-term care plan. Clients always come in. One of the biggest questions that they have for me when I'm talking about Medicaid home care, they want to go for it. They say, do I lose my Medicare? Do I lose my other health insurance? I said, no, we're just adding Medicaid managed long-term care plan for your home care. I mean, that's mostly what my clients are going to be accessing through the plan. But let's see, what else does it cover? Go to the next slide. Here's a summary of the managed long-term care benefit package, what it includes. Okay, home care, obviously we talked about that. Adult day health care, right? Medical and social model. A personal emergency response system. Well, they love that because that means maybe someone doesn't have to be at the house, and right? You put that button on, that's it. You're good. Nutrition. I'm being facetious, obviously. Nutrition, home delivered meals, congregate meals, great benefit. Medical equipment, they will provide some medical equipment, medical supplies, although some of my clients don't like some of the supplies, so they choose to buy somewhat better supplies. And home modifications. I haven't seen too many of those that the plans are doing, but supposedly it's included. Physical, speech, and occupational therapy in the community. Non-emergency transportation to doctor's offices. This was included. I think they found that more people were using it than they thought. So gets the note. This service will be carved out of the MLTC package soon. So don't expect to get rides from MLTC in the future. I think that was something they overshot there. Okay. Nursing home care, only up to 3 months. Then you're disenrolled once you're determined eligible for nursing home Medicaid. The interplay between nursing home Medicaid, which we call institutional Medicaid, and the way that someone who's in a managed long-term care plan enters a nursing home, and then who's paying for what and for how long, even the nursing homes get this confused all the time. Basically, when you go into a nursing home, if you have to convert the Medicaid from community Medicaid to institutional Medicaid, you're going to have to be institutional Medicaid eligible, which includes that 5-year review, transfer penalties, and all the likes and all the intricacies and complications of an institutional Medicaid application. Perhaps we can cover that in another webinar. But that interplay about who's paying, we are still educating the nursing homes about what they have to do. And coming out of this last 3 years with COVID, everyone was getting Medicaid because they loosened all of the rules on a lot of it. There were a lot of people put on Medicaid, especially in the nursing homes that were improperly on Medicaid. And I think they're going to be dealing with that in the next year or so, with regards to those people when they're up for recertification, finding out that actually they weren't eligible for Medicaid. COVID did some amazing things in that area, necessary things, I believe, but I think some of the facilities may have taken advantage of it. All right, 4 Medicaid services that are not usually considered long-term care that are covered: podiatry, audiology, dental, which I think I saw someone chimed in about dental, and optometry. And then you have to go, if you want to access those services, you have to work within the managed long-term care plans network of providers, which I guess can be a bit of a challenge. Okay, next slide. All right, so what is capitation? What are we talking about here? This is what I wanted to explain. I try to do this at all of my consultations because I feel like it's really important for folks to understand how Medicaid managed care works. And this is only something that's been around for about 10 years. We went managed care, and it is 10 years. I guess I say that as it seems like yesterday, but it's also been 10 full years that we've been dealing with Medicaid managed care. And I've been doing home care for 22 years. So for the first portion of it, it was really what we called fee for service, right? Medicaid was, remember some of you may remember the CASA offices, which we only have a couple now. But there was a CASA office in every borough. There was maybe a couple in every borough. It's where you went to apply for and worked with on your Medicaid home care, and the government, that was a government office, and they had government nurses, and they had people looking at the finances, and the nurse was over right away. And if they authorized Medicaid, they would pay dollar for dollar to the agency for the hours that were authorized, fee for service, right? But capitation came along. It was a way of the state to ascertain how much they're spending on all the Medicaid home care that's going on. And with all these high-hour cases, they couldn't get a grip on how much they were spending. So they figured, let's go with capitation. That way, we know how much we're spending, just because we can look at the number of members that are enrolled in plans, and we can just do simple math. So what does that mean? So I got this definition of capitation from the CMS website. Okay, capitation is a way of paying healthcare providers or organizations, for instance, a managed long-term care plan, like an insurance company, in which they receive a predictable, upfront set amount of money to cover the predicted cost of all or some of the healthcare services for a specific patient over a certain period of time. Okay? These capitation payments are made on per member per month basis. So MLTC plans, managed long-term care plans, negotiate with providers like home care agencies. They get their deal. Okay, for every member, we're going to pay you X amount of dollars an hour, right? The MLTC plans negotiate with them to provide services to their enrollees, either on a fee-for-service basis that they're paying the home care agency fee-for-service, the plan is paying them, not the government, or through an arrangement in which the providers accept the fixed period amount to provide services to their members, right? So how are the plans being paid? All right, the plans are being paid a certain rate. For instance, let's call it $5,000 a member, approximately that right now, right? So for every member that enrolls in a managed care plan that goes through NIA and is accepted to enroll, the managed care plan starts to receive approximately $5,000 a month from the government, right? There's income issues, there's pool trust issues, there's other things involved, but really I want to keep this kind of simple. Assuming that that's what the plans are receiving, $5,000 a month for every member. Now, the plan has to authorize a care plan that's appropriate for that member, even if that care plan costs them more than $5,000 a month, which, as you know, the cost of home care can be much, much higher a month than $5,000. I think the sweet spot is about 6 or 7 hours a day. And if you do the math at about $28 an hour or $20 an hour, you're going to find somewhere in there at about 6 hours or 7 hours a day is about $5,000 a month, maybe even more. And if you're going privately, it's more. But as far as the managed care plans, I think that's kind of like their sweet spot, right? $5,000. So they're looking at that number, and they're looking at folks who are coming for services for them. And like any entity, they don't want to lose money, right? They'd rather be making money, okay? However, as you can see, they are going to lose money on a member if there are hours that are higher than about 7 hours a day, right? So there's this gross incentive, this perverse incentive for a plan not to want to authorize or not to want to have members who require more than 7 hours a day, right? And that's the capitated stress. That's the structure that we're dealing with, right? And lo and behold, a lot of the offer of hours that we're receiving from these plans, even on cases that I know the law says are entitled to much more than 7 hours a day, the offers that are being presented to members, even after they go through NIA, is about 7-8 hours a day. It's a really common offer from plans, even for people in a wheelchair, even for people who have demonstrated that they can't really ambulate independently or toilet independently. Seeing these offers, and I'll explain that offer scenario a little bit too. But I explain this to clients at the consultations because I want them to understand we're going to go through a process, and that I wanted them to have expectations that are realistic. I also wanted to remind them, like I reminded you, that we have the law ultimately on our side here, and that we may have to go through a little bit of a fight to obtain what you're entitled to. Okay, I just the other day received a win on an appeal, on what we call an external appeal, on a client, a professional who is now wheelchair bound, 66 years old, extremely bright woman. I remember starting a case with her a year ago and saying, I said to her, you are the definition of a live-in case. The law defines your needs exactly on point as to a person who would be entitled to live-in care, meaning someone sleeping over, right? That we went through the process together. She was offered 8 hours. We combined it with some private care to get her the live-in while we worked through the process. And just the other day, she finally was awarded live-in care. Okay, so it's there. We have strategies to get it done. That's what we would talk about with you when you come in for a consultation. But I wanted you to appreciate the structure here. So go to the next slide, get a little more into it. All right. So imagine this, 10 years ago or 12 years ago, their Medicaid announces, and this is under former Governor Cuomo, who announces that we're going to go managed care. Okay, and they present this to us, and we're in New York City, and I'm surrounded by some of the best advocates in the world here in New York City. So we don't take things lightly. We heard about managed care, and knowing just what I explained to you before, we said, oh my goodness gracious, what's going to happen? We knew how proud we were of the New York rules. We know how generous New York was. We knew how many people had split shift care in New York, especially in New York City. And there's an added note to why I'm so proud. I'm lucky to do what I do, but I'm also lucky that I do it in New York City. Okay, because we do have the most aides of anywhere around, because the aides have access to public transportation. We also have people who are aides, personal care aides from all over the world, which, as you know, folks coming here from cultures where caregiving is part of the way of life for families, and we have those folks here in New York City. My colleagues who are out on the island or upstate a little bit, they're saying, David, we can't get the same home care that you can get for your folks in New York City, and it's because of the access to the aides. Really, the laws are the same. The generosity of the laws are the same. You know, that part's all the same. It's the access to the actual workers, which is the problem outside of New York City. All right. So here we are in New York City, and they launched managed long-term care, and there is no assessment process by the state. Okay, really what happens for what they launched this was, here are these managed care plans. You're going to come to Medicaid office for financial eligibility screening, right? So you're going to apply to Medicaid office for financial eligibility. And once you are determined eligible financially, they said, okay, now go get your home care from these managed care plans. You are now a consumer, and you are going to pick a plan, and you're going to contact them, and they're going to do an assessment of you, and they're going to see if they can enroll in their plan, and then they're going to provide you all the services that you need. Okay. And we're like, oh my goodness gracious, this is going to be a disaster. Okay. So soon after this launched, the plans, knowing what I've told to you, and it was very interesting when the plans first launched in New York City, they would come to our office. I was at Goldfarb Abraham at that time, and they'd say, you know, they'd come into they call us and say, we really want to explain to you all the great things that we can do for your clients. These are the plans, right? Some of them weren't even from New York; they were coming from Massachusetts and different things. They would come into our office, and they would have these shiny binders, and all the things that they were going to do for our clients. And we're like laughing because we're saying, okay, they have no clue what they're getting into here. We know exactly what they're going to do for our clients. In fact, we know the contract that they signed. We know what they have to do, actually, and we know what they're in for. And I think what they're in for is a big surprise. So the plans, knowing this, and knowing that the city and the state were going to auto assign all the folks who were on Medicaid receiving home care services, they were going to auto assign them to all the different plans, right? So there's a whole bunch of people who were not in plans, but the whole idea was we're going to get everyone into a plan. All right. But the plans are going to be paid the way I explained to you, not fee for service. So they're not going to get the money to pay for all these high hour cases. They're going to have to figure it out, right? They're going to have to figure out how this works. And some of the plans will make it, and some of the plans won't make it. Soon after it started, we lost a couple of the best managed care plans that actually existed before it was mandatory. And one of them was called GuildNet, the Jewish Guild for the Blind. And some of you guys out there may know about GuildNet. They were the best. They gave the hours appropriately. They were giving hours, 24-hour care. If it was a 24-hour case, they would authorize 24 hours. The other plan was called ICS, Independent Care Systems, which was really modeled, another not-for-profit that was modeled more toward younger people with disabilities. ICS also amazingly was doing the right thing right off the bat. 24-hour care, you're in a wheelchair, you need someone living in with you. Unless you tell us who else is going to be there, we want to authorize live-in care. So those two plans were doing it right off the bat. Of course, every referral I made was to ICS or to GuildNet because I didn't trust any of these other plans. Okay, they went out of business, right? Soon after, they were providing services and they were providing all these great benefits. But under the structure that I explained to you guys, they couldn't afford all of those high hour cases, so they eventually went out of business. But other plans, they were thinking, wait a minute, they're thinking out of the box. What do we need in our plan to make money, not to lose so much money? Well, what we need is people who don't need much, right? What we need is healthy seniors, right? We need healthy seniors. So where do we find healthy seniors? Well, I know, maybe if we go to senior centers where they're all hanging out, playing games, riding their bikes, walking up, maybe we'll find them there, right? And daycare centers and those kind of places where people are congregated. All right, so they went there. They were making some deals with the development of these daycare centers, and they got in trouble, right? So I found two articles that broke the story back in 2013, April 2013. Here, Nina Bernstein, great investigative reporter, broke the story in the New York Times, and I went and I found those two articles, and I put them here for you. You can go look them up. Where they found the State Department of Health found out that managed long-term care plans were actively recruiting healthy seniors at daycare centers to enroll in their plan, right? Now, these are people who were riding their bikes again. They were coming and walking to the center. They were people who really did not need any long-term care services and supports other than maybe some socialization and maybe a sandwich and a game. They did not need the types of services that were contemplated by the State Department of Health when they launched this program. But all the members that they enrolled, they'd say, oh, you're Medicaid eligible. Why don't you enroll in our plan? And you don't even have to pay the $10 a year to us. You don't have to pay anything. We'll cover everything here at the center. And you can just come here and you'll just add your card to your wallet and you'll be a member of our plan. Meanwhile, the plan starts to receive, at that time it was a little less money, but just imagine a few thousand or $4,000 or $5,000 a month for those people who they really weren't providing anything for, right? No services. But it was a good idea, right? And when these stories broke, I said to myself, does that bother me so much? Well, I can get why it bothers the State Department of Health. But for me, I said, listen, all I send to these plans is going to be high hour cases. So if they can offset the cost with some lower hour or no hour cases, for me, I think it's going to be better for my client. The Department of Health did not agree. The Department of Health suspended enrollment in some of these plans. VNS actually got in trouble, one of the bigger ones, for doing this. There were also other plans that got in trouble and suspended for a while and fined. And the Department of Health said, what are we going to do about this? Okay, so they introduced this concept of this gateway assessment. We can't trust the managed care plans to do an assessment because they have a conflict, right? I mean, it really just makes me laugh. So we're asking our consumers to join these plans, right? So we trust them enough to take care of our citizens and our Medicaid enrollees, but we don't trust them enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a conflict-free nursing assessment, which is exactly what it was. The state was going to perform the nursing assessment first and determine if the person actually needed services, right? So this is the assessment process that existed before NIA, right? And it came out and it was launched in about 2014, the conflict-free assessment. So there's some background, there's some history about how we got to this. The conflict-free assessment existed for many years. So go to the next slide now. All right, and then it recently led, I guess there's a few more nuances back to why they needed to move forward from the conflict-free assessment. And I'd have to go back to do more research on exactly what was going on there. I think maybe some of it will come out as we go through some of these steps. But in my mind, really, the NIA process is just overloaded with stuff. Okay, and increasingly, and it's too burdensome. So I'm not sure why they needed to switch from the conflict-free. Someone, I can get you that answer, but now we're dealing with NIA. Now NIA was launched in May of last year. So let's go through what NIA is and how we get there. I think we're doing okay on time. Hopefully. All right, so it was NIA, who and when. NIA is being implemented in stages, right? So not everyone had to do it right off the bat. Since NIA started May 16, 2022, it is solely required for Medicaid recipients or newly applying for personal care, right? And we're not receiving any of these services. Just this past December, this is like 6 months ago, it started for the people in the mainstream plans that I was talking about before, and also for the people who were involved in or accessing services through immediate need, right? So immediate need stayed out of it for a while, but now immediate need has to go through the 6 steps of the NIA process. Next slide. Okay. Who does not need a NIA assessment? Okay. So any Medicaid recipient that's already receiving personal care services doesn't need a NIA assessment. They're going to get reassessed by the plans. I'll talk about in a second. Annual reassessments and requests for increases will be phased in at a later date. So they are planning on having NIA do an annual assessment, and anytime that you have a change in circumstance, meaning you need more care, they're planning on having NIA also involved in those, but for right now, they're not. The immediate need recipients do not need a NIA when they transition to manage long-term care after 120 days. So you do need one to get the immediate needs started, but ultimately after the 120 days, when you're kind of pushed into a plan, there's not a new NIA done there. Okay. Also not needed for transfers from one plan to another, or from the mainstream to the managed long-term care plan. You do not need a NIA under that circumstance or those circumstances. Okay, next. So what assessments are still conducted by the managed long-term care plan? So routine annual reassessments are still conducted by the managed long-term care plans. Also the non-routine reassessments as necessary, like returning from being institutionalized, significant change in condition assessments, which by the way, we use all the time to get the process rolling on increasing hours. You know, I say to my clients, think of it, if you have a disease that causes you to deteriorate, even if it's slowly, every day is a change in circumstance, right? Every day can be a swing in circumstances and require more care. So, you know, words matter. So change in circumstances, if that's how I'm going to get a new reassessment, oh yeah, there's been a change in circumstances. It's easy to define. It's easy to describe a change in circumstances, especially when we're talking with people with cognitive decline, memory issues, and especially and physical assistance needs. Okay, and then assessments at the individual's request. There's no NIA for that. Though that's the managed care plan is going to conduct that assessment. Okay, MLTC to MLTC plan transfer assessments, where the last assessment was conducted by the first plan, the new plan would code this as an initial assessment. So there's no new NIA there. I have a feeling that in the future, every one of these assessments is going to be conducted by NIA. Again, I believe it relates back to the bad actors, the bad acting plan, and that the state wants to control all of the basis of the decision making, right? I told you that the plans are still the ultimate decider, but I think the state wants to be very involved in how those decisions are being made. Okay, and I think it does relate back to them understanding how much they're spending on this benefit. Okay, all right, next slide, sorry. All right, here we're going to go through the process now. Okay, all right, so once we've obtained Medicaid eligibility and we need to conduct the NIA assessments, basically what's going to happen is we're going to schedule 2 assessments. I'm going to go through this in more detail a little bit, you'll see. One of them is called the community health assessment, which Maximus is the company that NIA has contracted with. So it's called Maximus. That's where that name comes from. So the NIA Maximus nurse using the UAS-NY, it's on their, what do you call it, iPad. That's what they bring to the form is on the iPad. All right. And it's the same process. That first assessment can be 3 hours, if you can believe it. It's the same as that conflict-free assessment, right? So that's the number one thing that they're going to do. The second appointment that we have to make is the clinical appointment, the CA, which is conducted by a member, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, it's a member of what they call an independent practitioner panel, an IPP, who prepares a practitioner's order. Right, so it's this brand new person. It's not a doctor that you know, not a doctor that has any relationship with you. In fact, it can't be. That you're going to have a second assessment with, and that's the person who's going to prepare the physician's order. Okay, and the physician's order is going to be signed by this independent practitioner panel, and it decides if the person is eligible to enroll in a managed long-term care plan. Really, that's the decision that's being made. There's no decision about hours at this stage, right? So we're going to get in more detail about this. So let's go. Next slide. Okay. So if NIA determines that the individual may enroll in a managed long-term care plan, the managed long-term care plan uses the NIA, the assessments, to develop a plan of care. Okay. If that plan that the managed care plan has developed is for more than 12 hours a day, then NIA requires a third assessment. Okay, that is done by yet another panel called an independent review panel. This new high needs review is required if the plan or the Department of Social Services proposes more than 12 hours a day of home care. Okay, missing an S there. Remember that. All right, let's go. Let's get in more detail. Step one, and this is some good information for you guys to have on the slides, and I thank my friends at NILAG for the content here. And this is something that my paralegal, my Medicaid team, we know this is something that we send out to our clients, this information. So after receiving, here we go. Step one, call NIA. After receiving your notice of acceptance for Medicaid, we're going to call the number. That's the same number that we used to call for the conflict-free. And there's the hours for the call center. Okay, even open on Saturdays. Yay. The purpose of the call, and we tell our clients this, is to schedule 2 appointments, that community health assessment and that clinical appointment, right? The consumer, the caregiver, an authorized representative, the Department of Social Services, or a plan can call NIA to initiate the process. If the plan calls, obviously a consumer should be on the line, right? Now, the big note on the bottom here is we used to be able to schedule the conflict-free assessment while a Medicaid application was pending. So we could file it. You know, Medicaid could take 45 days sometimes to process the financial eligibility. We could get the ball rolling on the conflict-free assessment so that when the notice of acceptance came, we were ready to go to join the plan, right? I mean, time is everything here, right? You know, time is money, right? Time is care. Things are expensive, and these things are all adding delays and delays and delays. I mean, I have clients come in who are already paying for 24-hour care. Every day is a huge challenge, and it's a huge financial burden. And if you're eligible for Medicaid, why should you have to wait? But the new NIA rules say that your Medicaid must be active, so you really have to have Medicaid in place. Now, some people may say, well, active, I think of like the pooled trust and the zero surplus issue. You don't have to have a zero surplus. And I don't want to get too into the weeds of income surpluses and how that can kind of prevent Medicaid from billing, but you don't need it to be that active. You can still be setting up your pooled trust as you're waiting. They must do the NIA under those circumstances, but you have to have Medicaid eligibility. So you do have to wait for Medicaid to process your application before you can schedule your NIA. All right, go ahead. All right, step one continued. Like I said, the caregiver, the authorized rep should be able to call NIA. We've had some problems with that. There is a authorized rep form that has to be faxed to them in advance. And if the person answering the phone doesn't see it on the system, they won't schedule the appointments. We went through a whole bunch of bumps, and that was kind of recent that I remember that authorized rep form coming out. And so once we figured that out, we started getting that in place earlier and trying to get it up to NIA in advance. It takes a couple days, more delay, So here you go. You know, it's always good to know, and if you know, you know. That's what they say, right? So if there's an authorized rep form to be filled out, let's get it up to them as soon as we can. Okay, go ahead. All right, step 2, we're going to schedule 2 appointments. Both assessments should be within 14 days. That's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be conducted within 14 days. The consumer chooses either a Zoom or in-person appointment, but it's much longer wait for an in-person appointment. So a lot of our clients were being forced to do these assessments, these most intimate assessments about everything that you need assistance with, including your toileting and all of those things on a Zoom. Okay. Now I understand COVID brought on the Zoom in a way that I could not even imagine. I was never doing consultations over video, ever, until COVID. And I do realize how important they were and can be for people who can't access and can't get to be in person. However, I still much prefer an in-person meeting with somebody where I can really look them in the eye and we can talk about these things. And I can only imagine, and I've seen both. I've watched a Zoom Naya, I've watched a in-person Naya, and there's no question that an in-person appointment is going to be much more effective at giving the nurse and the nurse obtaining an actual real picture of what's going on for this person, right? Especially a person with dementia. I mean, we'll get into a little bit of that on the tips. Excuse me. All right, so these appointments can be scheduled from 8:30 in the morning to 5, even Saturdays and Sundays. They're going to get a call 1 or 2 days before the appointment. Naya will call the consumer to remind them. Good for Naya. There's emails involved, especially if there's Zoom links. I mean, can you guys imagine having to deal with this if you didn't have an advocate helping you? It shouldn't be this difficult. I'll go fishing and play my guitar. If they can make this a lot more accessible, I would be all for it. But I mean, the reminder can come in the form of an email, and how many emails do you get a day? I mean, I can't even look at my Yahoo anymore. So again, you try to advocate if you have some time, if you can get an appointment advocate for an in-person assessment if desired. I think it's much more effective. Okay. If you're gonna do a Zoom call, then prepare for it. Have your loved one sit in front of a camera and start talking to them. See if you can hear. I mean, there's so many issues involved in these Zoom meetings. Like when you add dementia or physical disability, it's almost impossible. So, think about what I'm saying, and if you can do it, if you're going through this, seek out an in-person assessment. Okay, but if you have to do Zoom, you can prepare for it. You want to have your Medicaid card and medications available as the assessment's coming for the assessment. Okay. Okay. Next slide. All right. Step 3, the community health assessment. All right. The nurse from NIA is going to conduct the assessment. Again, I said it's the same as the former conflict-free assessment. It can take about 2 to 3 hours. It's true. From my observations, it's not. I feel like it's not the nurse that's seeking to trip up the folks who are there. And I still tell my clients, I don't think the nurses are going in there as like, I gotcha, that they're agents for these plans. In fact, they work for the state. They're nurses. I mean, people became nurses for all the right reasons, I believe. But the form itself, the UAS form, seems to revisit some of the same questions again and again, and kind of ask questions in a different way. And I felt like some of that, the result was it kind of tripped up people. Once we had determined that the person, once it was established that a person couldn't ambulate by themselves, they would then ask, well, can you brush your teeth by yourself? I mean, that question, is, yeah, you can brush my teeth by myself. Oh, independently brush his teeth, right? That you check the mark. Well, but you have to go back a little bit and say, but someone has to actually bring me the toothbrush or get me to the bathroom, because if that doesn't happen, I'm not brushing my teeth by myself. So, that's just one example, and I felt like that's an unnecessary question. Once you've established that someone can't ambulate independently, why are we going down that rabbit hole of brushing teeth? If not, it's going to look like someone can do more than they actually can do. And that's kind of some of my observations on the question. Like we said, informal supports are encouraged to participate and provide detail of clients' needs. You have to be there. Someone who has got the consumer's back, someone who knows them, someone who won't let them be too proud or say, I can do this. I mean, when adrenaline takes over, you're having a guest in your home and you want to say all the things that you can do. This is not that time, right? This is the time to lay it all out on the table. I always tell my clients, consider when you're answering the questions that it's a bad day. Consider it a bad day, and that's the baseline of what you're using to answer the question. I'm going to explain more about that too, why that's really important. Okay. Informal supports. So you have to be there with the consumer, with the applicant, to help them and to help answer the questions, to give the nurse the real picture. And the regulations provide that there may need to be an additional assessment of the home, because they need to make sure that the home is an appropriate place for home care. And the result of this community health assessment was extended from 75 days. The conflict-free assessment used to expire after 75 days, which made that timing of it. Remember I said you could do it when a Medicaid application was pending? When you want to pick that spot where you feel like you're going to get that notice of acceptance. So you want to do it too early, you didn't want to do it too late, or else you had to do it again. It's not easy for people to take a whole day of work. I mean, 3-hour assessment and they're 3 hours late, that's a whole day, right? So now they extended it, but the results last for 12 months. Okay, go ahead. Next slide. Okay, advocacy tips. All right, so usually before our clients have an assessment coming up, a community health assessment, I insist on an in-person meeting or a call, a conference call or a Zoom call with them to kind of go over my tips. I kind of referenced some of this before. Obviously, you want someone there who really knows the needs and can be present and to point out what ADLs and IADLs are needed with regards to assistance. Here's the biggest ones, all right? And you remember this really easily. AT&T, right? The phone company. Remember AT&T. Don't remember the phone company. Remember what AT&T stands for in Cronenberg's lecture. I mean, this is way back from Q-tips. If any of you are advocates out there, remember Valerie's Q-tips, Valerie Bogart's Q-tips. This was AT&T, was the leading, and it still is what you need to be thinking about. And what's AT&T? Well, A stands for ambulating. And these are the unscheduled tasks that I mentioned before. Ambulating, which is getting around anywhere, right? Transferring, which is getting up and down from a seated position to a standing position, or back to a seated position, from laying down to getting up, and turning and repositioning. And then the second T is toileting, which really incorporates all of the above. And if you think about those tasks, AT&T, ambulating, transferring, and toileting, those are, for all of us, the few tasks in your life that really are unscheduled, that can't be scheduled. Let me rephrase that. Can't be scheduled, right? I mean, I guess you could schedule your ambulating, but if you need to get someplace in a hurry, or something happens and surprise you need to get out of the way, you can't schedule that, right? Same with getting up and down. And we all know toileting is very difficult to schedule, right? And so if you can establish that if you have unscheduled needs, then really a care plan where someone's not there is not appropriate, right? Because if they're not there and one of these tasks you need assistance with, then the care plan fails. So, and this isn't just me saying, this is in the regulation. Like it says if the agency determines that a person has unscheduled needs, then they need to look at the entirety of their day, right? You may sleep. So really, we're really talking about, does the person have nighttime needs that are unscheduled, or is it okay for an aide to be there but be asleep, right? The live-in care, right? The live-in worker gets 5 hours of continuous sleep. Or are we talking about needs through the night where the worker can't get 5 hours of sleep, which is the definition of split shift, right? 12 hours. So why am I bringing this up at the community health assessment? Because that's when you focus on AT&T. That's your first opportunity to advocate. I can't toilet myself. I need help. I need help getting there. I need help pulling down my pants. And that's undressing lower extremities. Once won a hearing on that, but we didn't take that into account. Stockings, oh my God, how do you take down stockings if you have balance issues? You can't. All the hygiene, all the memory that's involved in doing all those tasks safely and appropriately, and then doing it all in reverse and getting out of it, right? Toileting is huge. Unscheduled tasks one of the biggest tips that you can have that I can give you with regard to preparing for this assessment. Now, this 3-day rule. This is another thing that I observed on these NIAs, which to me is kind of crazy. And it seems like the fair hearing decisions, the judges who are looking at these cases, kind of agree, but it's not a guarantee. Basically, they go through the assessments, they get a picture of what you can and can't do, right? We have this whole conversation with them about your day and what you can and can't do. And then they get to this next phase of the assessment tool, where they start asking, have you fallen in the last 3 days? Have you needed this kind of help in the last 3 days? And everything and the sentence question ends with the last 3 days, right? And they say you're a person who hasn't had any home care in there. Has anyone assisted you with this in the last 3 days? No, because I haven't any home care in there. There's always an explanation. Have I fallen in the last 3 days? No, but I fell 2 weeks ago and I just got out of rehab. I mean, literally, this was the conversation that was going on in the assessment that I went to with my client who's an amputee, who has dropped foot on the foot, who had just come back out of the hospital. And they asked her, after they had established, the nurse was looking at my client, and she had to ask these questions. Have you fallen in the last 3 days? And I can't tell you what she hadn't fallen in the last 3 days, because she's had 24-hour care since she's come out of the hospital in the rehab, and no one would let her fall in the last 3 days. But I can't tell you, I'm pretty sure that the no answer lowers your score. I'm not sure about that, but why did they go through all these questions about the last 3 days? I actually kind of told my client the other day, you hear last 3 months. I don't know where this 3-day rule came from. I think it should be removed. And there's been some fair hearing decisions on this, because people have challenged the NIA results. And some of the judges rejected this 3-day rule by saying this is a completely kind of arbitrary question for someone who has long-term care needs. I mean, it could happen tomorrow. It happened a week ago. It didn't happen in the last 3 days. Okay. And here, the UAS references, it says the assessor does not record what they think the consumer should receive or what the consumer could do for themselves, right? So it's really the nurses don't have that discretion. It's really these questions, and they have to press it on the iPad, right? I don't even think there's room for them to write in notes. Okay, next. All right, huge tip for folks with cognitive issues. Cueing and verbal assistance, very important. Cueing and reminding to do things safely is a task that's contemplated in the law. And so if you are someone who needs cueing and reminding, it's very important. Some of the hardest cases that we have are folks who are strong physically, but have cognitive issues, have Alzheimer's. I mean, you guys are dealing with that at Caring Kind all the time. Cueing and reminding is different than just safety monitoring and watching, right? It's not about just watching someone to make sure they don't do something dangerous. It's cueing and reminding them to point out the need for this type of assistance. For example, reminding to use the walker, reminding to eat, cueing for toileting hygiene, cueing for contact darting. It's different than just saying, I need to be watched. It's an active assistance role in cueing and reminding, okay? All right, I'm gonna try to move up a little quicker now. Just remember, cueing and reminding is a legitimate task. It's contemplated in the law. All right. Another big tip, informal care, meaning you guys at home with your loved one who needs the care, your assistance with this is voluntary. You need to be clear about whether or not how much you can do for your loved one and what you can't do, right? As soon as you volunteer that you can do the evening, or you can do the morning, or any of that, they're going to incorporate that into the care plan, right? And they're going to use that to lower the amount of hours that they're actually going to authorize. So use your words carefully, right? All right, the final one, which I said a few times before, in-person assessment, much more effective way to conduct a health assessment. It actually may be worth the delay in the scheduling, okay? All right, step 4, we're up to step 4. Okay, the independent practitioner can be a doctor. We're going for a clinical appointment now. This is the second assessment. It's going to happen within the 2 weeks. It can be a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, a nurse practitioner, physician assistant or a special assistant licensed in New York State. The independent practitioner cannot have any existent relationship with the consumer, God forbid. Examines the consumer telehealth or in person, via telehealth or in person, again, Zoom, and reviews the community health assessment. Okay, go ahead. Okay, if the IP determines the independent practitioner at the clinical assessment, at the clinical appointment, excuse me, that's when they determine whether the person is self-directing or has someone else there to direct the care who can fill the responsibilities. Also, that the condition is stable to receive personal care assistance and that can safely receive the community services in the community. Basically, they're going to look at your environment, make sure that things are safe there for home care and is appropriate, and that this is the person who's going to complete the practitioner's order. All right. I put in a little definition on the next slide about what's stable medical condition is. You can kind of go back to that. On some of this, you know, we build up a case, we want them to have as much care as possible. And then sometimes I fear about that slippery slope going over, right? And if a person's condition, you know, for instance, they have open bed sore wounds that are not healing or getting worse, and that the condition is going to require frequent medical or nursing judgment, they may find that that person is not stable enough to receive home care. So emphasizing that home care works and that it's working, I think, is always really important. In my most cynical mind, or my you know, paranoid mind, I feel like this definition of stable could be used to eliminate high-hour cases off of managed care plans, saying it's just not appropriate. But remember, the managed care plan also has to have hospital includes private duty nursing or certified health from a CHA. So they're not really out of the box if they try to say that someone's not stable. But it can be another delay, and it also is extremely difficult to get the managed care plans to start services under some of those higher need programs, which obviously cost them more money. Okay, go ahead. All right. All right, so the definition of stable medical condition disqualifies people who need skilled care by a nurse. We just talked about that, so I'm going to move on. It's seeking personal care services, not consumer directed. Wait, go back one slide. Let me just finish that last piece. Make sure that you're not asking the aide to put the medication into the consumer's mouth, right? So that the aides are not supposed to touch the drugs. They can remind you to take the drugs. They can open up the packet or the weekly drug pill box, but they can't touch the medication. A consumer-directed personal assistance person could. All right, go ahead. All right. Step 5. After these assessments, there's going to be an outcome notice. Usually comes 2 to 3 business days after completion. NIA mails it out and to the authorized rep. And if it proves MLTC, if it improves the enrollment, the notice says that they're eligible to enroll, and the consumer can start contacting the managed care plans for potential enrollment. The plans are going to do an interview with them. The plan's going to use the NIA assessments to determine hours, but they still do a mini assessment to assess nighttime needs, the informal supports, and the consumer preferences. But ultimately, they're the sayer. They're the ones who are supposed to authorize the care plan. Go ahead. Next slide. Okay. All right. So this is step 5. We're still on the outcome notice. If the plan of care, as we said before, requires more than 12 hours per day, then the plan's going to refer back to NIA for an independent review panel. Okay. And this is yet another review. And remember, the timing is the key. So enrollment must be completed by the 18th of the month for services to start the 1st of the following month. So if this all falls and you get everything done on the 23rd, you can't start the 1st of the next month. That's a whole nother month, right? That is another 6 weeks which you can't enroll. I don't understand why they can't enroll people midway through a month, but I think it has something to do with the payment. Okay. If the outcome notice denies MLTC enrollment, then you do have a right to request a fair hearing against NIA. All right, I know we're running out of time for our questions. I will stick around for a little while. Don't worry. Okay. Step 6. Go to the next Okay, third is NIA assessment only is required on this independent review panel if the managed care plan recommends more than 12 hours a day. This independent review panel is going to review the assessments and determine that the plan is reasonable and appropriate to maintain health and safety. They may recommend changes in the plan of care, but not specific amount of hours. Independent review panel may speak to the applicant, representative, or primary care practitioner. That's a good actual thing that the independent review panel, we can actually use our own doctors. Now, I've been doing this a year with this new NIA, and I have not yet had one of these independent review panels. Every time my clients have obtained 24-hour care through the process in this last year, it's been through us winning an appeal on challenging the managed care plan through either an external appeal, fair hearing, or both. Okay, so I have not seen this play out where they've actually recommended more than 12 hours a day. They don't. You have to fight for it. Go ahead. Next slide. Okay. Okay, so if the plan, MLTC plan makes the final decision, I just said that, and issues a notice, they do not have to take the independent review panel's recommendation. Now, that would seem crazy to me if the independent review panel recommended 24-hour care and they still didn't take it, but it wouldn't surprise me. Excuse me, the plan may enroll you while that review is pending. When NIA starts doing reassessments for current plan members, the people who are receiving more than 12 hours a day will be grandfathered in, and no independent review panel, will be required, even if requesting an increase from live-in to split shift. So I don't have much experience in dealing with an independent review panel because I don't see that the plans are recommending more than 12 hours. And I think that's just the reason. I'll have to check in with some of my other advocates on how many people have actually dealt with this independent review panel. But most of us are obtaining the 24-hour care on those high hours through appeals. Go ahead. All right, so we have a few more things, and really this is some of the most important stuff. So I want to finish it up, if it's okay with you guys. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, I told you I start with continuity of care, so I want to kind of finish with that here today. One of the myths: a plan says to you, we can only give you 12 hours a week because of the NIA assessment. Fact, that's not right. That's a myth. The MLTC plan, not NIA, decides the number of hours. Okay. The reality is the capitated rate discourages enrollment of high-hour cases, and we talked about that before. Okay, go ahead. Next slide. All right, so there's a couple strategies involved in this. If the plan is blaming the NIA and you want the plan to reconsider their plan, there is a process for the plan to go back to NIA and ask for what's called a variance. It's kind of like a redo. I haven't seen that really play out. We've asked some of the plans to do it. I haven't seen it lead to anything more beneficial, and actually it can cause another delay. And again, sometimes delay is the worst thing that can happen. This is the strategy that we most often take. Strategy number 2: we enroll in the managed care plan, right? Holding our nose, or whatever you call it, accepting the low offer of hours, right? Then we request an increase in hours immediately, providing a doctor's letter, the night logs, and evidence. And I'd like to do another webinar with you guys on how we build evidence and how we do these appeals. But we talk about there's a change in circumstances. Like I said, every day is a change. We request that the plan come over and do a new assessment. Then when you remember and they do a new assessment, now they actually have to give you a notice with their determination. And if that notice is adverse to what you're requesting, now you have your appeal rights. Your rights have vested. This is still a public benefit. You have due process, and you can that leads to several forms of appeals, which I hope we can cover in another webinar. And we win those appeals. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to jinx anything, but like I said, the law is very much on our side. Okay. All right, go ahead. Next. All right. Here we're going to end with this: continuity of care. And how do I do it, right? So I told you when I start these my consultations, I usually ask, especially if people have home care in there, I want to know who's doing the home care. I have to emphasize really strongly that you do not want to pay people off the books. There's some really strong workers laws and domestic workers bill of rights. Of course, there's the tax laws. And there's also insurance. Your homeowner's insurance does not cover a worker who falls while they're in your home. You will be paying for their hospitalization if necessary, and maybe their loss of earnings for a long, long time. So off the books is not something that you can even touch. I am not naive to the fact that there are workers who do not want to work and declare their income. I also am not preaching, because I did pay my nanny on the books for 10 years. It costs about a third more if you do it on the books, right? But very, very necessary. Okay, but say you want to keep the home care workers that you have, and you want to transition to Medicaid. You can ask your private home care workers if they will consider working for a home care agency that has contracts with managed care plans. I have several of those agencies. They will hire any worker who's willing, and they will put that worker right back on your case while you're going through Medicaid. And once you get up Medicaid, you can use that worker and through that agency, and you've now achieved continuity, right? And so we may take a lower amount of offers from the managed care plan when we're starting. We pay a little bit of additional private hours so that we get the full plan that we're looking for. I call it a hybrid plan. We use it all the time. And then we're building the Medicaid hours till we ultimately get where we want to be with the full care plan paid for by Medicaid, by that managed care plan. Okay. And so that's some of the big tips that I have on continuity. I'd love to share more of that with you guys if you come in to see us. Go to the next slide. We'll end with this one. Complaints about NIA. There's the information on filing a complaint on NIA and the appropriate Department of Health complaint unit. And you guys can refer back to that later. And then go to the next slide. Okay, and I finally want to thank my friends at the New York Legal Assistance Group for helping with the content. They really break down this information in a palatable way. I even broke it down further for non-lawyers so that you can help. Please consider visiting their website. They are a sister organization to Caring Kind, and a huge resource for everyone out there trying to navigate through all of this. And thank you. That worked pretty well. It didn't leave 15 minutes, but I encourage you guys to come in and see us at Grimaldi Young Law Group. If I can't answer all these questions tonight, I'm going to hope that Michelle, the group, can send me the questions that I can get in touch with. We can give you some answers, and then you can share them with the folks here on the website who are joining us today. If you have a few off the top, let's give it a shot. I'll do my best. But thank you for listening. I'm impressed we got through it in the time.
Well done. Well done. Very informative.
That's crazy, right?
And it seems like there's so much more to say, you know?
Yes, there is. There is.
Okay,
There is.
so I'm just reading down some of these slides. So there's someone had Letitia had asked if we're going to provide the slides of the recording. I know Debbie, you had said that you would like to review it first.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't, right? So I ramble on too much, but I hope
okay. So is the person told? I've been told that the person, someone asked, I've been told the person who is POA and healthcare process is ineligible to be a paid caregiver in New York State. Is that true?
Right. So that has to do. I talked a little bit about that. That was because it would presumably be that power of attorney person who would be signing off on the timesheets for that very worker, and so you can't be both, right? So they think that's a conflict of interest, right? So that the power of attorney can't sign off on their own timesheet, right? It's interesting, right? They made a rule about that, but they didn't think that the plans would be dishonest. But that's where that comes from. So when that comes up, what we'll say is have someone else be the director. Maybe the neighbor be the director, and the POA wants to still be the caregiver. Okay, you just need to come up with another person. That's where geriatric care managers can come in really key. Again, another expense, I know, but some of my greatest allies are geriatric care managers, social workers.
Great. Can you define self-directed in regards to eligibility criteria? Can an adult child of a 96-year-old blind Medicaid recipient act as PA and given disability?
Yeah,
given disability of parent or oversee PA and CDPAP? Does MLTC allow for hybrid?
Describe the person. It was a
90s adult, can an adult child,
adult child, fine. That's fine.
96-year-old blind Medicaid recipient as
Yes.
PA, given disability of parent, oversee PA under CDPAP? And
Yes.
does MLTC allow for hybrid PCS and CDPAP?
Yes and yes. And you know what, that hybrid piece was something that was newer to me. And I know that some of my colleagues use that. I said I had pros and cons about consumer directed. Usually the clients coming in to see me are looking to kind of get back to being a spouse. They're kind of looking back to being a daughter, and they're looking back to going to their job too. Right? And consumer directed, I feel they really need to know what they're getting into. If the worker doesn't show up, then they don't have a worker showing up, right? But some of these fiscal intermediary agencies that can act as both, they'll say, no, we'll supply a worker. So doing a hybrid consumer directed plan can work, especially if you have some of those like medication issues and some of the skill need issues.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm currently doing a written appeal to my mother's MLTC during her dementia. This has been terrific.
Okay.
Comment. This has been the most wonderful comprehensive webinars I've attended on Medicaid. Thank you very much.
I want that person's email.
Thank you. This has been helpful. Exactly how my colleagues did. You explained exactly how my colleagues did. Easy to follow, beyond informative.
Okay.
Very informative. Thank you for a lot. Immediate need is going through the same process as all the other cases.
Yes.
Now and then.
That's right.
If your loved one is wearing diapers, what do you do during the assessment?
That is a
question.
Is that a practical question? Like, what do you do if they gotta go? They need to be changed. If they're wearing diapers, you tell them and you explain that the person can't change themselves. Here's an awful example. Remember I told you about the case that I just won last week? So she's a wheelchair bound person who she cannot get out of her bed but without assistance. Okay, but she's continent. She's not. She knows when she has to go to the bathroom. All right, she feels it. Right, so she needs assistance to get to the commode, or she needs assistance to get to the bathroom. The plan, Blue Cross Blue Shield, MLTC, no qualms about telling what the plan was. One of their reasons why they were denying her live-in, because they were only there for 8 hours, so they're leaving at 6 o'clock. Okay, you can't get into her bed, so they want to leave her in the bed. One of their rationale was you can wear adult diapers, right? This is to a person who doesn't need to wear that, right? As a reason why they don't need someone to help them. So, I mean, we're talking about dignity. We're talking about humans. I just couldn't believe it. And of course, talk about UTI infections. We're going to talk about the practical nature of it. We'll talk about like the how it's totally medically unsafe to sit in a soiled diaper for 8 hours, right? She can't change herself, right? That they should actually be pushing that nonsense onto a person who doesn't need a diaper, right? And we wrote letters about that, and that was just disgusting. That just happened this last week, okay? And that is some of the worst that I've seen, and thank goodness we won, and that was completely rejected. But that was Blue Cross Blue Shield had no problem putting that into two versions. First, there's an appeal on the internal appeal, and then there's the external appeal, and then there's, I mean, they never backed off. Crazy, right? So you tell them about the diapers, and you tell them how hard it is, and you tell them you get a letter from the doctor about how that diaper needs to be changed immediately, or else they're going to lead to an infection and they're going to go to a hospital. That's what you tell them.
Have you heard of the services ICANN, Independent Consumer Advocacy Network, to help with appeals?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I have a fantastic David Silva that runs that ICANN, one of the ICANN offices here. He's one of the best in the business. They're a fantastic group.
When I said that, you know, that there was a workaround. That is what is done in New Jersey. Just to clarify, only the person and his or her power of attorney can call NYIA to set up an appointment. Is that correct?
You have to be an authorized, you have to fill out their authorized form. I mean, that's what I know now. We just had that hiccup on some cases several months ago, and now we know how to do it.
How
There's
is
an
the
authorized
Okay.
rep form. It's not enough to send your power of attorney. You actually have to, there's a form.
Okay,
That has
how
to
is
be
the
filled out.
just form? Okay, and the last question is, how is NHTD different from the
Oh.
plan discussed this evening?
My suggestion about that, Michelle, would be to get someone. It's different. It's a different program. There's a long waiting list. It's in theory, it's wonderful. It seems like it covers 24-hour care, especially for dementia patients who needs that safety monitoring. I think that it would be, and I know people who would love to present to Caring Kind on that benefit alone, on what that entails. I will tell you though, there's a long waiting list for it, and you have to be rejected for 24-hour care through these other means before you can get on that waiting list. But there are home care agencies that shepherd people through that, the Nursing Home Transition Diversion Program. And if you connect with me, I could have someone willing to do a webinar for you just on NHTD.
Okay, great. So anybody who have that question, you see Attorney Cronenberg's email at the bottom of this screen
Yeah.
that's in front of you. You're encouraged to contact him. These are really good questions. And this is a complicated process. It seems easy, but it's actually complicated. So, you know, if it was straightforward, everybody would be doing it themselves all the time by themselves. But you know what? Money well spent in hiring an elder attorney who this is what they do.
Yeah, again, I would love to go play guitar and go fishing.
So,
My wife may have a problem with that, but I would love to do that. It shouldn't be this difficult, and it gives me a lot of satisfaction to help people through this stuff.
so great. So thank you everybody for being here tonight. Please do visit our website for other seminars and programs and early stage programs and water safety, you know, whatever you need to help us guide you and support you through this journey of memory loss, whether it's you or someone you care for. Caring Kind is to be by your side. We're a trusted partner, and we're happy to help.
And we've already
Again,
started our teams for our September walk in Brooklyn. So get ready. We're coming. We're going to beat our record from last year.
Oh, that's exciting. Very good. Very good. So everyone says thank you very much. Thank you, Attorney Cromwell. I do appreciate you and your volunteering your time to lead the seminar. Again, his email, Attorney Cromwell's email is at the bottom of the screen here. Grab it now before we say goodnight. And thank you again for attending this Caring Kind news series, which I believe is going to happen again and again and again as we see the need. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Take care, everybody. Thanks a lot, Michelle. Thanks, Jed.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. Bye.